Peter, this is take two because we just had a fire alarm. Anyway, so going back to the beginning,
Yeah,
Peter, you come from a musical family.
I do. And I have four siblings, myself and my older brother, who was a chess player, Jonathan, and my two sisters, Gillian and Miranda, and they both learnt violin. In fact, Miranda has had a long career as violinist in the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra. She was the deputy concertmaster. I think she still is. So musical family. My dad was a journalist, and he became the foreign correspondent for 3 years to the New Zealand morning papers in the 1960s, 65, 66, 67. He wrote stories and sent them back to the Herald, the Dominion, the Christchurch Press, and the Dunedin Otago Daily Times. And so we lived for 3 years in London when I was just a young boy, aged about 6 through to 8. And I saw a lot of my uncle Glyn, who at that time was playing the viola in the London Symphony Orchestra.
So how did that happen?
Well, he had been a viola player in New Zealand, and he'd studied at the Royal Academy, got a scholarship to the Royal Academy, and he then became principal viola of the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. And Alex Lindsay kept in touch with people back in London and said to Glyn, there's a job going at the LSO, London Symphony Orchestra. And so Glyn packed everything up, went across on boat to London, where they said to him, look, we're so sorry, we've just given the job to a young American viola player. But he's been drafted to the Vietnam War because he's American. So we do actually need someone to sort of act as principal viola. And they auditioned him and said, well, we'll give you a trial, and we're actually on a big tour of the United States with the conductor Gennady Rostovensky, and he's found this young talented cellist named Rostropovich coming out of Russia, and this was his big first time touring, and he was playing all of the major cello repertoire. Well, one night management came and knocked on Glyn's door and said, Walter Trampler, the viola soloist who had been booked to play Don Quixote by Strauss, which has a famous viola part, Sancho Panches, to the cello's Don Quixote. Trampler is sick and he cannot come. Somebody needs to play the viola solo, tomorrow night in Carnegie Hall. and Glyn said, well, I've done it once in New Zealand with Wilfred Simonow, so I have played it, and they said, good, well, Rostropovich wants to see you in his hotel room. So Glyn goes up there, Rostropovich plays through the whole thing with Glyn, and then they drink some vodka. He says, yes, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. Glyn remembers the Playboy magazines because this Russian had never seen this sort of stuff in the West. And the next night they played Don Quixote by Strauss, and Glyn was nervous, but he was fine, played well, and the management came up and said, the job is yours. You've now got the principal viola London Symphony. And he remained there for 3 years. And then he went off to Adelaide, funnily enough, to teach at the Alder Conservatorium there with Ron Woodcock and a wonderful pianist, Gail Peterson.
A cellist, yes.
And so they were, a trio for a long time and taught. But he passed away just this year, earlier this year, Glyn, aged 93, 94. So my parents, my dad was always a hi-fi buff, and he played a little bit of recorder and saxophone. Never had any great training, but I grew up in a house with lots of music, and Dad would play, wake us up on a Sunday
This
morning.
was here in Dunedin.
Yes, it was here.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we came back from England, and I was about 9 or 10, and I said to Dad had been playing Acapulco, of all things, Benny Goodman, Artie Shaw, all those great jazz clarinet players, lots of big bands, swing clarinet stuff. And he'd also been playing Sibelius symphonies to wake us up on a Sunday morning loudly on his stereo. And so I said, yeah, I'd like to learn the clarinet. And they made me learn a year of recorder, which was great, with doing a bit of music theory and learning to read music. And then after that, he said, okay, you can learn the clarinet. And they bought a clarinet in a big long box. Someone made a homemade clarinet case where you kept the whole clarinet without taking it apart. And I was given this thing, which my father had bought, and I remember sitting in the car and pulling it out and putting it in my mouth and just going, ba, 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 just bringing my fingers down and playing, from E to E or whatever it was, and fumbling around. And I had no idea about reeds or anything, but I just sort of naturally managed to make some noise from it. And then I had a first teacher named Wes Faulkner, and he was a man here in Dunedin who ran the capping show band, and he was more of a light music person. And we would sit and play. I remember he had a book of jigs and reels. And we'd play jigs and reels, and he'd give me bits of clarinet or saxophone music from whatever he was arranging for a capping big band. And that's the sort of musical start I had.
Not a lot of Brahms or Mozart.
No, that came later. And actually I fumbled around, and then he said to me, look, there's an Englishman come here as one of the itinerant teachers, an oboe player, David Thomas, and he's a much more classical sort of person. I think you should get lessons from him. I think, he would advance your playing. So I went to this man, David Thomas, and I was about 13 or 14. And then I went to a Waimate music camp, Mark, and it was the first of these Otago University Extension summer schools. And I went to this Waimate music camp, and I remember arriving, and we're in the school. Sorry about this fire alarm. We're in the school, and I could hear this clarinet being practiced somewhere down the corridor. Someone was flying up and down, Weber, all sorts of beautiful things, and I was like, wow, I've never heard a clarinet like this. There was a young man named Mark Walton.
Never heard of him.
Never heard of him. And I met you, and I think I met Guy DeLacy at that music camp as well, another clarinet player back then. And it just opened my eyes, because of course you were a wonderful player already. I think you were maybe 1 year older than me. We're both very young still.
Of course we are, yes.
And those music schools, I then went to several more, and they went back to Otago,
Yes.
another place. But
weren't they extraordinary?
they were just something absolutely amazing.
I actually look back on those music schools as some of the happiest music making I ever have had in my life. And I've had a lot of happy music making, but it was amazing.
I agree totally.
Yes.
I think those music schools quite possibly kept you and I and others, gave us stimulation for a year of practicing and keeping going, looking forward to the next one.
Yes.
But they really, really gave, and we met so many wonderful people, and suddenly you weren't alone practicing in your bedroom anymore. You knew all these people who came to music camp, and you were looking forward to meeting them all again a year later and making music with them. And you'd be thinking, oh, I could play chamber music with this person, or maybe I could get the Cacciaturian trio out with some, all these sorts of things. And I remember we had a wonderful opportunity, Mark, thanks to Wally Hamer, the clarinet tutor, and you were by far the most advanced and were capable of doing the whole Weber, was it the first concerto, I think.
That's correct, yes.
But he said, no, let's be democratic. Mark will play the first movement or the last movement, I can't remember which one. And I got to play the slow movement.
Yes.
And I was a terrible player, really, back then. Nothing special at all. I was, had a lot of issues to sort out. Still very raw around the edges.
But you were very good at jigs and reels.
Exactly. Yeah. But that was just wonderful. Just to have to try and to see what it was like to do that.
I actually went back to Waimate, and I stood outside the little building to the left of the school where the clarinets rehearsed, and I relived those memories there. Yes. Those mistakes and squeaks and everything else. Yeah.
There was one year we played the Gordon Jacob Concertino. I don't know if you were there that year. I
don't know whether I was there.
But it was an arrangement for clarinet choir.
Right.
And again, Wally had there were 4 movements, and 4 different soloists played each movement. And the rest of us, we all took turns to play either bass clarinet or...
So Wally was from England, wasn't he?
He was from
England.
England.
He was a sort of large sort of man who mumbled through his moustache.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always thought he looked Mexican, even though
Yes,
he was
yes,
English. The big moustache.
yes, he did look Mexican. Yes, yeah.
And very laid back.
Incredibly laid back. Yes.
But I heard him play one music school. He played, is it Humphrey Searle's Cats thing?
Yes.
And at the end there's a second part. It's a bit odd. And he pre-recorded this ending. It goes running down, and
Yes.
another part goes running up. And
Yes.
he performed that one music school, and I thought, my God, he can play.
Yes. Well, he was in the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra,
Yes, he
wasn't
was.
he?
Yes.
So from those very happy days
Yeah.
on music camp, what followed next for Peter?
So then I went through King's High School, which is a South Dunedin school, and it's not meant to be. It's a bit like Shirley Boys. It's not meant to be as glamorous as the Christchurch Boys or the Otago Boys, but it actually was a very musical school. There was a music teacher there named Peter Warwick, who was an organist and choir master, and he took extra music. He did the Bentley test and listened to. Got a whole lot of us to do ear tests, and then said, right, you're going to have extra music instead of art if you want it. And so extra music consisted essentially of doing music theory, going through grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, and so preparing us for school certificate music. And he had a class of about 8 or 9 of us who did school certificate music. And then 6 of us got into the National Youth Orchestra from King's High School. David Angus, who's had a long career as bassoonist.
Only just retired.
Only just retired
Yes.
in the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra.
Yes.
Another musical treasure. So he was always tinkering with motorbikes even then. He still does now. And there was James Sneed, a very good violinist, who's now a professor of mathematics at Auckland. And Sinclair McLaren, an oboist, and Ross Law and Trevor Coleman, both brass players. Trevor Coleman was my best friend. He was a trumpet player. And he went the jazz route, went to Berkeley in the United States and did a jazz. He's a very good jazz pianist and trumpet player. And he now lives in Seville and has and makes recordings and plays jazz. Is very well known. But he and I were great mates, so we had our first ever public performance at the Timaru Caroline Bay Summer Festival in their Talent Quest.
Really?
Yeah, and we played Herb Alpert, Tijuana Taxi,
Really?
and a little piece called the Dixie Doodle Rag.
So was this for trumpet and clarinet? Or?
Trumpet and clarinet.
Okay.
And we got through the finals. We got a backing from a band called Nick Nicotini and the Nicotini Brass. And they were the resident band for the summer festival in Timaru,
Yes.
Caroline Bay. And,
So after
wonderful.
that, nothing could be as good as
I
that.
know, exactly. So I went through school, and I came here to Otago University, and I wanted to do clarinet performance, but they didn't have a teacher. So I started doing composition and music, music history, music theory, music analysis. I was able to pick up some clarinet in second and third year. They actually said, well, you could go, you could have lessons from Wally Hamer when he's in Dunedin, and we could fly you up a couple of times. They found some money, and so I had these intermittent lessons of Wally for a year. And then they did the same thing with your old friend from Christchurch, Keith Spragg.
Yes.
I went and had some lessons from Keith on freezing cold mornings in Christchurch winters, walking around to his house at about 8 in the morning, because he had to teach me before he went off to work.
Yes.
So I had these early morning lessons. But what happened to me is that essentially, I played in National Youth Orchestra and things, and I played in the National Youth Orchestra with Rachel Vernon and John Robinson and Mary Scott. And so we had a very good clarinet section, and I held my own there. And those 3 went on to be professional players. John Robinson played in Opera North in Leeds, and now he lives in Christchurch.
That's correct, yes.
Plays extra stuff for NZSO
Yes.
and CSO. Mary Scott's done a lot with the NZSO as an extra player, and Rachel Vernon, of course, is a proper salaried NZSO clarinetist. But I went the route of, I thought, I want to be a bit like my mentor, who was a man named Jack Spears. And Jack was a conductor and a viola player, a very intelligent man, a music lecturer. He composed music as well. He was a jack of all trades with his name, and master of all of them, really. And I thought, what what a career, you know, university. You can play, you can conduct, you can compose, you can teach. Wow. And so I sort of said, how do you go about this route? And they said, well, you've got to do the whole academic thing. You've got to go for first class honours degree and a master's degree. And so that's what I did. And I went off to London in 1981. And instead of all my cobbers were doing, you know, Royal College, Royal Academy, Guildhall, doing performance, I was doing music theory and analysis at King's College London, and I had a Commonwealth scholarship, and so I was learning Schenker graphic analysis and all these analytical methods, and I was analysing music, and I had great teachers, Arnold Whittle, who's written books on music since World War One, and Brian Trowell. These were very well-known academics, so I had this sort of a different thing. And so clarinet became just something on the side, and Rachel was living in England then, and she'd ring me up every so often and say, I've got a gig, you know, Norman the fixer has got an orchestra that's going to go and accompany some choir somewhere, and we've, you know, got one rehearsal and then a gig playing, you know, Haydn's Creation or whatever it would be. And she said, they need a second clarinet. And so I often piggybacked as second clarinet to Rachel on these sort of gigs around the place. So that was the only sort of, and I practiced my clarinet for about half an hour once a week because I was doing all this academic stuff.
Yes.
And then I spent 5 years in England. So when I'd finished the masters, I started a PhD, which I never finished. Because I was doing a bit of conducting with a choir, and I was singing in another choir, and I was playing a little bit of clarinet, and I was just sort of a portfolio musician, as they call us now.
Did you, even at that point, did you know you were going to come back to Christchurch? To New Zealand?
I thought I probably would.
Yes.
But I hung around there. There was lots happening, and then with quite bad timing, I decided I was coming back. With 10 days before I left, I met this lovely young lady named Tony Plant, who's been my partner ever since. So it was rather bad timing. It was like, oh, it's lovely to meet you. Let's start going out. But I'm going back to New Zealand in 10 days.
And Tony is English?
She's English. And so I remember getting back to New Zealand and sending her an envelope with my remaining English cash in it, saying, put this towards an air ticket, come and have a holiday and visit, you know, which she did. So for a few years I was back here, and I was just doing Saturday morning music teaching, some private clarinet teaching, some music theory teaching. I had a day helping the itinerants teaching in Oamaru. Nobody else wanted to drive that far. Tony came out, and she got a job here, and so we started living together. And then finally in 1990, there was a vacancy here at the School of Music at the University of Otago, at the very bottom, junior lecturer or assistant lecturer, and I applied for that and got it. They knew me, I'd done a bit of tutoring, and I was Johnny on the spot.
Yes.
And so I've now had, I think I'm in when I finish this year, I will have done 36 years here at the music department.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's my potted history.
Yes. And conducting the youth orchestra. How long have you been conducting the Dunedin Youth Orchestra for?
Wow, that's a long, long time, because I played in it. It started in about 1976 and was started by Roger Buckton, who then moved on to Christchurch. And Art Brusser helped him, and Art Brusser is still alive and still involved in Saturday morning music classes. So I played clarinet in it. And then about 1981, before I went to England, while I was still at university, Art said, did I want to be his sort of assistant conductor? And that's how it started. I was like the assistant conductor to Art, working with the number one orchestra, the youth orchestra, and that was part of Saturday morning music classes then. In the early 1990s, it separated out from Saturday morning music classes and became, they wanted it to be a separate entity, try and get more university students. They changed the time of it away from Saturday mornings, terrible time for students, sport and whatever else, hangovers from Friday night. So they moved it. And so when I came back from my 5 years in England, the Youth Orchestra Committee got back to me quite quickly and said, would you like to come and do a bit of conducting? And I'd done a little bit of choral conducting, and I came back and I was singing in a little chamber choir that Jack Spears took, and one of the other singers said to me, the big city choir is looking for a conductor, would you do that? So suddenly I'd arrived back from England and I had the youth orchestra to conduct, and what turned out to be the city choir Dunedin. It was called the Schola Cantorum in those days. Suddenly I was getting paid to do these Tuesday night rehearsals with the city choir, and I was doing these Friday night rehearsals with the youth orchestra. And the youth orchestra has always been, you don't have one conductor throughout. You have one for a semester and then you change, just to give the kids some variety. And for a long time, Anthony Ritchie and myself and David Birchall have rotated around, and we're all good friends, and
Yes.
it works really well. And occasionally we get another completely different guest conductor person in to have a break from us. So how life, these sort of serendipitous things happen. You get rung up and it's like, you're back from England.
Yes.
There was still that attitude back then that the person who'd gone overseas to study must somehow have more to offer than the person who hadn't. And I don't know if that's true at all. I don't know if I was any better probably I had broadened my experiences, but
Just a little bit older. And tell me about your eyesight.
Yeah, so isn't it funny, clarinetists and eyesight?
Yes.
So I have a hereditary thing called retinitis pigmentosa, which RP for short. And it manifests itself when you're a teenager, first of all with night blindness, not seeing very well in the dark. And I can remember being at a barbecue on a farm, my uncle's farm, and I was about 13 or 14, and tripping over a big tractor tyre that was like a sand pit. And everyone else could see it, but it was just a dark lump in the dark ground to me. And then it became a bit of a joke, I'd watch out for that lamppost.
Yes.
So the night blindness thing started about 14. And then the other thing that happens is very gradually your peripheral sight narrows. So I've only got tunnel vision. I've lost all my peripheral sight. So I look off, you probably think, where's he looking at?
Yes.
'Cause my eyes go off to the side. And
Yes.
so I have a little tunnel of central vision. So I drove until I was about 40, 42. And then the eye specialist said to me, right, you're just about on the legal limit for your peripheral sight now. You'll have to stop.
And was that hard for you?
I said, I thought it was going to be. I did one final sort of holiday drive and drove through central Otago and up over the Haast Pass to the west coast to Franz Josef with Tony. And we shared the driving. And when we got back, I said, that's it. And I thought it was going to be a real pain because, you hop in the car and get to this rehearsal and hop back.
Yeah.
But I ended up doing a lot more walking, and I became an expert on catching buses. And now the government's been great with, they're subsidising public transport at the moment here. So taxis I can get for a sort of quarter of the normal price. So
Right.
So I walked the dog and got a taxi down this morning. So.
Yes.
So my eyesight's always been, just gradually got narrower and narrower. And so, that's another thing that perhaps, I don't think I would have been a very, even if I'd had the head for it, which I don't think I do, I don't think I would have been overly successful orchestral clarinet player. Because of the eyesight thing, it was a looking at the music. I'd have reading glasses for looking at the music, but then the conductor would be fuzzy, you know. And it's not like I've got that peripheral sight to see them in the corner of my eye.
No.
So I have done a lot of helping out the Dunedin Symphony Orchestra. I can remember doing some ballet gigs and, you know, playing through all of Swan Lake as clarinet parts and thinking, why am I doing this?
So at the end of this year, there's going to be changes in your life.
Yes.
So what musical plans do you have for the future?
Well, I will carry on doing a bit of conducting. I've spent a lot of time conducting brass bands. I'll conduct anybody who asks.
Yes.
And I'm not doing it for the money, so I don't charge a huge fee or anything.
Yes.
I've worked a long time. Another thing that happened, I got back from overseas. It was 1986, and a couple of years later, there's a knock on the door, and it's the local brass band who are looking for a new conductor to take them to the A-grade championships. And I've had this relationship with brass bands for 30 years or more. And people ask me why, and I say, well, they're the only organisations I know who, full of these keen amateur musicians, who absolutely embrace brand new, hot off the press music. So, you know, there's an A-grade championship in Dunedin in 2 weeks' time here. You know, the New Zealand National Brass Band Championships will be 30 brass bands. And they're all going to be playing these pieces of 7/16 and 5/8 and, you know, all sorts of challenges. And they don't tend to play, you know, Beethoven. They're playing works by living composers throughout Europe and England, brand new. If it's 10 years old, it's almost regarded as so I've always enjoyed that, because from a technical aspect of conducting, it's always been very interesting and challenging.
Yes.
So I will carry on a little bit of brass banding. I do quite a lot with the Dunedin Symphony Orchestra. So I'm their sort of go-to person, resident in Dunedin for things like, in schools concerts and, sort of special, not their subscription concerts, but more specialised sort of things. So I'll carry on. So I'll do a bit of conducting, and I may even get my clarinets back out and blow the cobwebs out, and I might just sit in one of our local wind bands.
Right.
And just go and, they're no good, but I'm no good either, so that's fine.
we'll have to edit that bit out. And what music do you listen to music for leisure?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what sort of music do you like to listen to?
Funnily enough, isn't it strange? You know, you're like your father. I listen to classical and jazz, and I listen to, I love Walton and Sibelius. You know, so I'm in the mood for symphonic music. I might listen to Sibelius 3 or Sibelius 5 or 7, or I might listen to Walton 1 or Mahler. I love chamber music, so, you know, I might listen to, the Brahms Clarinet Quintet, still an exquisite piece. I love the trio as well for clarinet and cello and piano. Bliss. I listen to lots of chamber music by different composers from different times. At the moment, I've been listening to a lot of Debussy piano music, not being a pianist.
Yes.
But loving it. But I also listen to a lot of jazz.
Yes.
I've never played jazz. I envy Nick Cornish, who's a wonderful classical oboist, but a superb jazz improvising saxophone player. You know, I really envy him, and a good friend. I really envy his skills in jazz. So I love jazz, but, you know, I can sort of vaguely tootle a little bit of jazz, but I don't have those skills of knowing I could use the Lydian mode over this chord and it's a C sus4, you know.
Sure.
So I still listen to lots of, I listen to Eddie Daniels, great clarinet player with an amazing sort of sound, actually, very different from many. And I listen to just a lot of the good old big band stuff.
Yes,
still
sure.
Benny Goodman
And a final question, rather than talking about sort of music at the university, just sort of mapping how music has changed, whatever, in Dunedin. Is it sort of the steady, constant force, or is it has there been an ebb and flow with music making in Dunedin?
I think it has been a steady, constant force. I mean, Dunedin punches above its weight. It's a smaller city of 140,000 or whatever, but it has this university, and from that we've always had, you know, a great number of choirs, for example. You know, the choral scene here is very rich. The youth orchestra is tracked through constantly. The Dunedin Symphony Orchestra, that used to be called the Dunedin Civic, and then the Southern Sinfonia and the Dunedin Sinfonia, but it's always been there with a constant giving its concerts, and the NZSO has always come 3 or 4 times and given its concerts. So I feel like Dunedin has, you know, it has got a rich sort of musical life that goes on here. And the youth orchestra's carried on throughout. There's 3 or 4 brass bands, I mean, at the moment, as we all know, tertiary education is underfunded by the government, and so that flows through into music. So, you know, my colleagues are all fighting over scraps to get things done. It's hard to get extra money to buy a piano, or to you know, to get support to go to a conference. But despite that, the actual outside sort of Dunedin music scene still flourishing, I think. And I'm looking forward to being sort of involved once I retire from the university. I'll still spend time in Dunedin, and hoping to spend some time in a place like Twizel as well, and just love the outdoors. So we might have a little holiday escape house in Twizel, but I'll be coming back to Dunedin to do various music things of one sort or another. And I'm actually looking forward to just doing a little bit of composition as well, just writing a few things purely for my own enjoyment, and not for anybody else.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter.
Thank you, Mark.